to share with you two ideas. I'm calling it the table and the door. So the table, and it's going to be like your dining room table primarily, your kitchen table, where the family gathers, hopefully, and the door, as in primarily your front door, although, again, both of those will get used kind of as something to put our eye upon, but again, I think you can figure out how everything we say about the table doesn't have to be around a physical table with four legs and so on and so forth. So that's what we want to talk about, the table and the door. I've got some handouts. I'm going to save them to the end, and so if we run late and so on and I forget to tell you, they are right here. Please take one on your way out. With this lesson, I thought it was best not to give them to you ahead of time. You're welcome if you want to take notes and whatever, but I'd rather you primarily catch the idea, and then you can kind of walk away with some of the details and so on later. So table and the door, a little bit about myself just real quick. If you don't know me, I am Mark Rohde. I pastor in Lincoln, Illinois, but kind of the role from which I'm speaking to you today, I get to be dad to three kids. My oldest son is Wesley. He is 19. He's finishing up his second year at Urshan College. My son Caleb is 17, and he is a junior in high school. And then we enjoyed having kids so much that we got those half raised, and we're like, let's start again. It's not quite how that story went. I have a daughter who's 9, and so I jokingly say that I will never be an empty nester. I'll just, I'll enjoy it through the rest of y'all, and I'll feel like I'll be an old man whenever my kids are out, but that's all good. I've got 2 boys and 1 girl, 3 kids, married to my wife Holly for 23, we headed toward 24 years before long. So in the comments I'm making so on, that's kind of where I'm coming from, is why I give you that little bit of bio and so on. But we're talking about spiritual leadership today, and as men, of course, we're called to be spiritual leaders in our home. And I want to share with you these 2 tools that I think will be helpful if you can visualize those and kind of get this idea in mind and be able to make that happen. It's, as I mentioned, table and a door. I bet you already own the tools. You already have those, I would suppose. But I want to talk to you about how to better utilize those things, and we'll develop that idea as we go along. Starting a little bit slow, spiritual leadership. I'm just going to blow your mind here. It takes 2 things to have spiritual leadership. You have to be spiritual, and you have to lead. I know. I see you scurrying for your pens now. I get it. You got to be spiritual, and you got to be able to lead. With the limited time that we got today, I'm not going to work too much at the spiritual aspect of this. Okay, you're here. I'm going to trust you're going to be in church tomorrow. I'm going to trust that you've got some kind of handle and understanding on the spiritual side. I hope that you do. I pray that you do. I'm going to assume that. Or that if you don't, I assume that you know how to get that way. If you're not praying, I assume you know you need to pray. And I'll leave that with you. But problems exist when men try to step into a role of spiritual authority and they aren't spiritual. Spiritual leadership isn't just about reading a lot of Maxwell and having good principles. It's about being spiritual, right? And so that doesn't work. And the first rule of spiritual leadership really is to be spiritual. You don't have to levitate off the ground. You don't have to prophesy in the McDonald's drive-through to the worker that asks, how may I help you? You don't have to be able to do that. But you got to be spiritual. You got to know Jesus. You got to be connected to God. And I will say, I'm not going to spend much time at all here, but I would just suggest this as we talk about spiritual leadership today. If you size yourself up today and you say, you know what, I'm not spiritual, I'm carnal right now, I'm this, I'm that, the best thing you can do for spiritual leadership is to try to put pause on the leadership. You give that 30 days and you go get spiritual, right? Like, if I'm trying to lead my wife and kids while I'm not following after Christ, what's Paul say? Follow me as I follow Christ. I'm making a mess is what I'm doing. So first rule of spiritual leadership, be spiritual. I'll leave you with that. We're going to talk about the leadership part a little bit more and a little bit of strategy there. I do think that with most apostolic men that I know and talk to, if they're not winning in the area of spiritual leadership, it's not generally because they aren't spiritual. It's the leadership side of things. And so that's where I want to spend most of our time today. As we talk about this idea of the table and the door, I'm sharing with you some things really that I've learned through experience and study. And so if you walk away and go, that's crazy, hey, that's fine. It's what's worked for me. It's some of my experience and so on, and it may not be the same for you. And I'll tell you right off, as we talk about the table and the door, one of these things I feel like I do pretty well. I start to apologize to you for that because I don't want you to think that I'm all so arrogant and cocky and whatever, but I've kind of figured out finally that, like, hey, there's some things I do well and there's some things you do well, and like there's no reason to be like weird about that. We could probably make a long list of things I don't do well also, maybe for you too. But as of the two things today, I'll tell you, one of them I feel like it's a skill for me. I've done it well. And the other, brother, it is a journey right now. I do not do well at all with it, but boy, I'm trying now. But some of this has worked for Holly and me, and that one is the table. The other tool, like I said, I've just started fairly recently working on this idea of the door that I'm going to share with you, and it's an everyday battle for me, I'll just tell you. All right, so the table, it's a reference to your kitchen table. Yours might be in the dining room, but it's the place where, we can gather together as a family. And I'm thinking primarily for dinner. Now, again, your situation might look a little bit different, but follow me with this. In fact, I'll just ask, how many of you, and please, when I ask these questions, there's no shame, there's no judgment, whatever. How many of you, for your family, whatever your family context looks like, on the regular, you eat dinner together around a table of some kind at a fairly routine time? How many say that's true for me? Okay. Most of you, great. And I understand that's not true for everybody, and I get that. If you don't, though, I would highly encourage it. I know some families have gotten accustomed to, hey, everybody just grab something whenever they want because we're busy, or no one's cooking, so you just do this, or, hey, people eat, but we're all gathered around a screen as we do, or phones are out, or that kind of thing. I would highly encourage you with this idea of the table, though, that the first thing is really that you want to be together. The first rule of the table really is that everyone eats dinner together at the table. All right, so getting into it, this is kind of the primary tool that I've used to exhibit spiritual leadership in trying to raise godly children. Now, when I talk to guys about spiritual leadership in the home, I've seen it happen a bunch of times. As we start to have that conversation, the first thing they start to say back to me is like, oh yeah, I need to be doing family devotions. Now, brother, if you do family devotions, that is great. I don't. We don't. We have at different times within our house, but we don't currently. I don't have any plans to next week. If that is different or bothers you, I'm sorry. We don't. My kids hear me speak enough. I'm their pastor. I'm in tune with that, right? And so we don't do that. If you do, great. Like, we don't do family prayer meetings, son. Like, not as a regular Tuesday night thing. Now, we pray together, that kind of deal. But we're talking around the table. This for Holly and me has been, we point to it as the biggest form of spiritual leadership that we use is when we gather around the dinner table. The conversations we have, the way things get steered, the values that are transferred, and so on. And I don't have them all out of the house. The jury is still out, but so far, so good. I don't have perfect kids just like you don't, but so far we've got them pointed in a good, godly direction, and for that we are grateful and thankful. Even if you do this family dinner thing just 4 of the 7 nights a week, that's over 200 times in a year that you're getting to sit together. Your pastor gets 1/4 of that with Sunday mornings, right? You have the influence. We were at leadership seminar. Some of you were there, Illinois District Leadership Seminar just in the last week or so. Brother Jeffrey Harple made this quote. He said, "You don't raise your kids in church." Let's pause there because we often use that term. I raise my kids in church. He says, no, you don't. They don't sleep at the church. They don't eat at the church on a regular basis. You don't raise your kids in church. You raise them in your home and you bring them to church. And so church is important, but we can't think, well, I raise my kids in church. I got them there and the youth pastor was supposed to take over. All the youth pastors say, amen, that's not us, right? Like, I can't fix in one youth night a week what that is, right? Like, yes. My youth days are coming back, and I feel the Amen Corner building as well. So, right? We don't raise our kids in church. We raise them in our homes. And so our homes have got to be a God-honoring place if we are going to have spiritual leadership, if we're going to raise kids and get the results that we want. So talking about this idea of the table, if you can get this image of the table, being able to disciple others around the table, it comes off in a much more casual way. Like when I talk about we impart values, I do not put on my tie when I come to supper for pizza. I do not say, children, thus saith the Lord, right? But we have conversations, we have interactions and so on. I hope to be able to dive into that a little bit. But it's really worked well for us. Your mileage might vary, but I think there's a number of transferable principles here that will work in just about every family. And so you gotta be together for it to happen. And then you gotta be present, though, when you show up for it to happen. And as men, I can stand in that line and say sometimes that's a struggle, right? Sometimes it feels like a win just because I got to family dinner, right? It's been a weird day at work. I'm trying to hustle home. There's ministry stuff going on later. There's this, there's that. Sometimes the win is just I got to sit down with the wife and children, right? And there are days, hey, you can chalk that up as a win. I get that. But overwhelmingly, if we're going to have influence, I can't just have slid into the seat, act exhausted, not have any words to say, not have any capacity to hear the stories from school or anything. I've got to be present whenever I am around the table. So we got to be there. We got to be present when we're there. And then the third rule of the table is that the table can't be a disciplinary tool. If you're going to make this work, the table cannot be a disciplinary tool. Now, I'll tell you, when we get to the door, I'm going to tell you the door can't be a disciplinary tool either. Do not think that that means that I do not believe in discipline. The name card on my home office that was given to me by my wife and children says, Benevolent Dictator. I considered duct taping it to my shirt and wearing it for you today. That's the running joke at our house. Sometimes the benevolence is a little more and sometimes it's a little less, right? I kid, but I want you to understand, I'm going to tell you 2 times, like, don't use that for discipline. I'm not saying don't discipline. There's times for that. That's part of direction and correction. It has to be, but not in these areas that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so get it. Yeah, that has to happen, just not here. All right, so here's the deal. What we're trying to do is build an environment, is what I'm talking about primarily today. If you can build an environment around your dinner table that says it's a fun zone, it's a happy place, it's a time we all can enjoy, even if I'm 14 and everything that my dad does is weird. I at least know that it's going to be good times around. Then that's a place where children can be open. That's a place where we can have an exchange. But if every time my boy sits down to dinner, he's worried about if I'm going to quiz him on if he cleaned his room like I told him to yesterday, or why isn't the yard mowed that I told him to do 2 days ago, or anything like that, he's not going to be open to anything I've got to say. Sure. He's not going to be open to sharing with me anything that's happening in his life. And so, again, I believe in discipline and that kind of thing, and I believe in responsibility. And so if my boy was supposed to do something 2 days ago and it hadn't been done, it gets addressed. It just doesn't get addressed at the dinner table, right? Now, I'll tell you, while I feel like I do well with this, I'm not perfect like anybody else isn't. There's been a day or two where it's a rough day around the dinner table, right? Sometimes it happens. So when it does, give yourself grace. But what I'm saying is, as a rule, I'm going to deal with that at a different time. I'm going to deal with that later this evening. I'm going to deal with that with them tomorrow morning. I'm going to handle that in a place and in a way. The table cannot be a form of discipline or else it doesn't work. It's kind of like if you would take one of your wife's good kitchen knives, because you got some boxes out in the garage that need cut up, and that's what's handy. And it'll cut up those boxes. It just won't work well for its intended purpose, and she won't be too happy when you return it, right? Like, you can use the dinner table because we're all around to set the record straight and to set the kids straight, but you're doling up some knives that you need to be able to keep sharp, right? So you can, you just don't want to. It doesn't work so well. All right, so I've told you that you want to eat together as a family on the regular. I've told you you want to do your best to be present when you're there. And I've told you that I run the roadie law enforcement department at a different time and place than at the dinner table. All right, so what do we do at the dinner table? Let's talk about that. What do I do at the dinner table? I talk, I ask questions, I try to get my kids talking. Now, I understand that seems pretty low bar, pretty pedantic. I get it. But this might be a skill that you need to work on. I understand that. You've got to know your audience, right? You've got to know who you are addressing. I feel like I've done fairly well with that. My wife is like ninja level with this. When my oldest Wesley he was born in Alabama. We moved from Alabama when he was 1 year old. And somehow Alabama football got in his blood. And since he was old enough to walk around and talk nearly, probably more like since he was 5 or 6, he has been a diehard Alabama football fan. My wife can talk college football with any of you. She doesn't care one bit about sports. She saw a way to get into his life, and she watches football with us. She knows the players. She can explain the defense to you fairly well. Like, she gets it all because she sees like that's a way to get into his life. And even as a young kid and even to now, she can talk football with him. Understanding what our kids are interested in, what gets them going. Caleb, my second born, is a science geek, and you can throw out some kind of sciencey thing, and it's like a textbook blew up at you coming back, right? But it will open him up. You want to talk drums? I mean, I can walk up to him and say, paradiddle, paradiddle, whack. If you know percussion, you might get that reference, and you might not. He does. He'll say something back to me, and away we'll go. We could geek out all day long. So sometimes it's knowing your audience, knowing what they're interested in, what engages them, and so on. If you have teenage boys, you probably aren't going to get a lot of yardage out of a question like, so what happened at school today? Nothing. How was school? Fine. Right? Don't ask those questions, right? Figure out a different way to approach it. Come at it in a different vein. Holly and I really have become great teammates on this. As I prepared to share this lesson, I asked her to just kind of have a conversation with me the other day, and we just kind of battered some of this around. And I said, hey, let's just talk. Help me flesh out, like, what has made some of what we do successful. One of the things she came up with, I wish I would have came up with it, because I think it's a good quote, but I've got to say it was her. She said, we don't waste questions. And I'm like, I'm writing that down. Because she's right. We don't waste questions. What's that mean? When our kids ask us questions, like, we try to drain everything out of that we can. And there's a couple of avenues of that. One is we have tried to be as open with our kids as possible. There's every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, you're going to have to say something like, that's none of your business. And that's kind of a way it's possible, but it's none of your business. Or I'll talk to you more about that when you're older. There are a few things for which those kind of responses are needed. But we don't want that to be a daily or a weekly or a regular response. We want to be able to answer. My kid's going to find the answer somewhere, right? Like, no matter the question. If it's just because it's mundane, or if it's because it's too personal, or if it's because it's sexual, or your kid's going to find out the answer. Be honored that you got asked the question. Don't waste the question. And so just on that, this straight ahead level, like, give them their due when they come asking questions. I've got to check myself at that at times. And again, sometimes I'm getting away from the table. Sometimes I'm not at the table. I'm in work mode, and they come asking questions. Yeah. Like, that's tough, right? But even if you can't break work mode, you need to be able to tell them, hey, that's a great question. Let me get back to you. Or sometimes what I say to my kids, that is a great question. After supper tonight or at supper tonight, would you ask me that again? Because then I can give it full thought. Then I can really give you my attention. And now you're not blowing them off. But don't waste questions. That don't waste questions can have a second kind of meaning too. You might remember back in the Old Testament, Israel comes across Jordan. And Joshua is told that as this happens, you're going to do a couple of things. Have you guys pick up 12 good-sized rocks. You're going to put them in the riverbed whenever you walk through on dry ground. And when you get to the other side, they're going to take 12 big rocks, and you're going to make a pile of them right there. And I love how it says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but I love the whole idea it gives. Because it says, we're going to put these rocks here. And the reason God gives for putting these rocks here is so that your kids will walk by and say, Dad, why are these rocks here? Like, how awesome is that? Have you ever answered somebody to make you ask questions? Right? That's scriptural, literal, to make you ask questions. And so God said, put those rocks there so the kids will say, why are those rocks there? And when the kid asks why those rocks are there, it's not the time to explain granite versus some kind of composite. It's not the time to explain weight and mass and gravity and tension and so on. When the kids say, why are the rocks there? You say this: we were bondmen in Pharaoh's household. We were slaves in Egypt, but God. Right? Yeah. Don't waste questions. Dad, how come I got to dress like this? That's a great question, son. Now let me explain to you why we don't wear this or why we do wear that. And I believe I ought to be able to give my kid a good reason. If I'm going to tell him pants to his ankles, there needs to be a good reason that I can express. Not pastor said so, not just shut up and do it. That's what the church does, right? I need to be able, if you can't, you need to go figure it out. Okay? But then I want to be able to tell them exactly. When my daughter says, why don't I cut my hair? She needs to know why she doesn't cut her hair. But she also needs to know, honey, we were slaves to sin. You never knew it because your mom and dad got to come to Jesus before. And in my case, we are a part of a long heritage. Your grandma and grandpa gave their lives to this. And your other grandma and grandpa gave their lives to us. And it's do not waste the question. It's a time to give your testimony. You understand? And it doesn't need 72 scriptures. It doesn't need to be a sermon. It needs to be in a way that they can connect with. Don't waste the question. All right. Going on, just getting them talking. When they talk about current events, when they talk about things at school, when they talk about the unfair coach that doesn't let them play much playing time on the team, whatever it is, these are great opportunities to lead your child, right? Don't think this isn't spiritual leadership because I don't have a Bible in my hand or because we're not talking in King James English, right? Like, it's, again, remember the Old Testament when in Deuteronomy 6, we love the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord part, and we should. But as we keep reading, remember you're going to teach this to your children when you rise up and when you lay down and when you're walking along the way and there's, if I remember right, about 6 different instances throughout the day in which you're going to teach that. Now, what I do not picture is an Old Testament Jew going to wake up his son in the morning. Wake up, little, I started to say Johnny, that's not a good Jewish name. Wake up, little Abraham. Hear, O Israel. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, right? Oh, it's time to journey. All right, let me get out the scroll and read to you. No, that's not how I picture it. It's not, okay, check. Oh, I only got 5 of this. Check, got the 6. It's not that. It's let this be a lifestyle. Right? And I'm talking about the table today as a way for us to get a handle on this idea of lifestyle, of being able to connect with our children through the day-to-day instances of their lives. In Acts 8, Philip, the evangelist, goes to the eunuch at the chariot. He's reading from the scroll of Isaiah. And I think it's just really cool how the scripture says, and Philip, starting there, preached to him Jesus. Now, don't get too holy on the preach to him Jesus. Again, I'm not telling you to preach a message around your dinner table. If you do, I think you're doing it wrong. All right? But I think I also ought to be able to start at what the unfair math teacher did in my kids' eyes and be able to impart to them Jesus. Amen. Now, I'm not talking about, oh, I don't even say anything to Dad anymore because he turns everything into a teachable moment. I'm not doing that, right? But when my kids start saying that stuff, I start asking questions. I play dumb. They think I am already, so it's not hard. Tell me about why that's unfair. My kids like to argue and antagonize, and I do too. So they know at times I'll just play devil's advocate no matter what. Tell me why that's unfair. Well, what about that kid? What if he did that? And what am I? I'm making them think, making them comprehend. And so often they eventually go, that's not right. It should be like this. And every now and then I'll throw in, because remember when Jesus said, and we're imparting values. Mm-hmm. We're creating an environment. It's more about what you can impart to them than necessarily what you say. A few ideas with that. If it feels like a Bible study, they're out. Don't do it. But impart values. Give them a chance to develop their own ability to think. Ask them probing questions. Have fun. One of the things that I feel like we have done well at our house is we do our best to keep it fun and light. Even when we're talking about big subjects, and we will sometimes. Just something comes up in my work day or their day in school or a current event or whatever. And even when it's big, heavy topics, we have fun. We keep it light. And keeping this idea that anybody gets to say anything here. And so have fun with it. This next one you got to be able to take with the grain of salt that I mean it with. Be sneaky. We have any, I know the question was asked last night, any hunters in here? All right. So if you're hunting deer, I'm not much of a hunter. It involves getting up really early in the cold weather and sitting still. And I can handle any of those three things as needed and by themselves, but that doesn't seem like recreation to me. So more power to you guys, but that's not me. But if I understand right, and I think I'm at least that smart, the point of deer hunting is to kill a deer for purposes of eating it and perhaps to have a trophy on your wall, right? That's kind of the summation. But you don't come at it at a straightforward way. You don't walk out into the woods and say, "Here, deer, I'm going to kill you. Come out, wherever." You don't do that. You get into the woods before it gets light so that they don't see. You try to do it as quietly as possible so that they don't hear. For reasons I do not understand out of my good brethren who like to hunt, at times you smear the deer's urine on things that you own. If that is not sneaky, I don't know what is. So that you can accomplish your task, right? Now understand, all analogies have good starting points and good stopping points. Every single analogy can be taken way too far. None of us are here to kill or to eat our kids. None of us want anything of theirs smeared upon us. With those couple of things set aside, I don't pull my kids up to the table and say, "Let me make you more like Jesus today." For the same reason, I don't go yelling through the woods, "I want to kill you, deer, come out here." Right? So when I say be sneaky, I don't mean be conniving. I mean, know what you're after. And we got to come from it from a different angle sometimes. And so the more I can get into his life, the more that she will open up to me. Whether I impart great knowledge to her today, or whether she just spent another day around the table knowing that she can say anything that she's concerned about or interested in or has a mind of to her dad and to her mom. I won again today, and tomorrow she might come with something big, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a bit of sneakiness involved. Get interested in their interests. See problems and solve them, even maybe in the sneakiest of ways. I'll share with you a little bit of how I've tried to do some of this. I've worked at trying to pull the stories that will make some sense to you. Again, big picture, you're creating an environment. If you don't get all the details of what I say, if you don't do it the way that's all great. You want to create an environment where you can connect with those who are under your care, right? But this idea of sneakiness a little bit, and seeing problems and trying to solve them. So my 17-year-old son, Caleb, I told you, he's a sciencey guy. He's a brilliant inventor type. He really is. He wants to pursue a career in science. He would love to be a mechanical engineer for Elon Musk, building a rocket that goes to the moon. Like, seriously, that's what he's interested in. And seriously, he probably has the brains to do it. Like, that's where he's at. I know that he's headed in a couple years for the science wing of a university so that he can study on. And I know he's going to hear a lot of pompous professors talk about how everything that he sees around him has evolved from some kind of single cell organism that came from some kind of a big bang in a godless universe. Like, I just know that, like, that's where we're getting ready to send him. Okay? So there's a few things I can do about that. I can try to convince him not to go to university so that he doesn't lose faith. It's an option. I can lecture him 3 times a week on God's role in the universe. That's also an option. These probably don't all have to be mutually exclusive either. I have chosen to address the subject by coming at it with flat earth and black holes. Fun zone topics around the dinner table. The roadie dinner table is a crazy one. Much of Young Men's Encounter is a result, by the way, of the roadie dinner table. That's not playing. Like, most of the events that you see, like, those got battered around. They started out really, really crazy and ridiculous. We were going to jump off a roof today, but the rain last night made the flat roof too wet, and I was afraid it was slick, and it really would be. My kid said, what if we jumped off a roof? And we start out by saying, like, that's stupid and ridiculous. And then we go, yeah, but how could we? And so, like, seriously, we'll probably do it next year. We'd planned to do a mattress jump off of a little roof over here that, when you get down to it, isn't such a big deal. But, boy, it feels crazy and scary to these boys. That's the kind of stuff we mess with around the dinner table. Anyhow, let me move on. What I did was I learned a handful of talking points from flat earthers. Somehow they got into, like, my Facebook video scroll and whatever. And I just started watching some of it. But if you're a flat earther, I love you. I think it's weird. But I did. And so, like, I became, like, the household flat earth expert. And so when Caleb started spouting this sciencey stuff, and I say spouting, like, it's geek to me. I'm relatively smart. I ain't that smart, right? And so he starts, and I start throwing out the flat earth. Well, yeah, but what about this? Oh, how could that be? And so, and we just carry on about it. What I'm doing, I throw it, and he bats it back. He comes at me with this and science and reason and understanding and so on and so forth. And then I pivot and I say, yeah, but what about that? And his critical thinking skills are top notch, man. And part of what I'm doing is just helping develop that. Yeah. I pushed that so hard. My daughter, Jara, 9 years old, came to me in my office one day. She kind of came up beside me and she talked quietly. She said, Dad, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, honey, what's up? She says, I just need to know. Do you really believe the earth is flat? Dads, you know how when every now and then you have that moment where you're like, I have won. And I had to stop myself because part of me, like, because dads, we also know when we're winning, we don't want to stop. And there was that split second. There was, like, how far can I push this? But I caught myself and I said back to her, no, I don't believe the earth is flat. But let's just keep that between you and me. But that's what I've done with that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And I understand, like, you don't see a bunch of spiritual stuff from that. But I'm hedging. I'm protecting against what I see coming. He's getting ready to get punched in the nose with the university. And I'm confident he's going to stand strong when he does. Not just because of that kind of stuff, but as we bolster that, and as he knows he's got an avenue to come back and talk and ask questions, we're creating that environment. One of the things that I want to do with all of this is creating an environment where when my kids leave, they want to come back. Now, not for very long. I don't want them to stay a long time. Like, they ain't moving back in. But I want them to feel like Mom and Dad's house is a fun place. Hey, Mom and Dad asked me to come over and eat. You betcha I want to be there, right? They're going to have kids one day. And you better believe I want to see those grandkids around here, right? So you can rule with that iron fist if you want to. As long as you're under my roof, it's going to be like this. Well, that's fine, but there's a day they're not going to be under your roof. And so if you want to lead like that, you got to understand there is a termination date on your ability to lead. But when I can create a loving environment, and when I can create an environment where all questions are safe, and I can create an environment that says we fully are engaged with what we believe in, such that everything is fair game, and you're not offending me by asking me a question, I'm happy to tell you the answer, and I'm happy to have that conversation. That's some of what we've tried to do. Let me hurry on because I am quickly running out of time. Let's see. I'll share one more with you about the table, and then we'll move quickly to the door. This is the kind of stuff we've done. Like I said, it's worked for us. That's all I claim. It's worked for us. When my boys were little, this is the kind of stuff we've done. I'm talking about solving problems and like coming up with creative solutions instead of like, you will do it like this. Sometimes you've got to say that for something, but if that's your go-to method, brother, you're going to be in trouble, right? My boys were little. They both got real negative for a while. I don't even know why. They'd come home from school. They were both in like elementary school. And you couldn't find a good thing that had happened in their life. Everything was bad. Wesley is older, and it seemed like, particularly with him, it was getting critical and so on. And like we weren't even sure what it was coming from and whatever. And, we tried this like, don't say that. Don't be like that. Surely something good happened or whatever. But, maybe your kids just do stuff because you tell them to. That's not how these kids that my wife has given me do, right? It's probably the in-laws' influence. I don't know. Kids were little. Saw that happening. On a whim one day. I say on a whim. I thought about it. And I announced one night at dinner. I said, from here on out, each night at dinner, there will be a good day competition. And as we eat dinner, the four of us at the time, Jerry came along a year or two later, the four of us are all going to share the best thing that happened in our day. And after the four of us have shared that, everybody is going to extend their finger in the air like this. And I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. And when I say 3, you're going to point at one of the other 3 people in your family as to who had the best day. And we're going to see who wins the best day competition each day. Only rule, you can't vote for yourself. Now, competition does a lot of things around my place. And you would be amazed at how we turned dinner table culture around in a few weeks. That event lasted for years. My kids learned how to be better storytellers because of it. They figured out if I tie emotion into it, I might get mom's vote. If I can make it funny, I might get dad's vote. Right? They learned how to play to an audience. They probably became better politicians because I don't know. I do know one thing. They got much more positive about it. They got much better at being able to mine good things out of even a rough kind of day. If you would have come over to our house for dinner, I don't care if you were the president or the pope or the neighbor next door, if you ate dinner at our house during those handful of years, there would be a time during dinner that your hand was also up in the air, and it would be insisted that you're voting to and that you're sharing something as well. We have memories of my little daughter, Jerry, in a high chair. She can't even really understand the stories that are being told, but there's her little finger in the air. She's going to cast her vote. It's silly. It's dumb. You don't think like, oh, that's spiritual leadership. You tell me the Bible study you teach to get people to be positive, right? You tell me the Bible study you teach to get people to focus on joy and peace and so on. It worked for us. And so when we have this idea of around my table, this is how we're going to do. It has a lot that it can do for you.